In the frozen silence of Antarctica, where the wind moves like a ghost whispering through the endless white, scientists have begun to uncover something that does not belong to nature: perfect hexagonal, magnetic anomalies buried deep beneath the ice. Not circles, not random distortions, but geometric precision, like patterns drawn by an intelligence that measures space with the accuracy of a cosmic architect. These anomalies don't just sit idle, they pulse. Instruments record oscillations that rise and fall, like a hidden heartbeat trapped beneath the planet's frozen skin. For years, Antarctica has been treated as a geological mystery, a forgotten continent locked under ice for millions of years. But these magnetic formations rewrite that history entirely. Imagine hexagonal nodes forming an invisible honeycomb beneath the ice, each one resonating at a slightly different frequency, as if transmitting information between themselves. If you were to map them, they form lines that converge toward what appears to be a central hub beneath the South Pole, a hub that could be either a natural coincidence or the cold metallic heart of something designed. Some scientists call them lattice echoes, suggesting that they may be remnants of an ancient meteor impact that somehow arranged iron-rich minerals into hexagonal, crystalline structures. But the problem is this: natural impacts do not produce perfection. Nature is chaotic, asymmetrical, imprecise. Yet, these anomalies are spaced at exact mathematical intervals, 4.62 kilometers apart, repeated across a grid spanning hundreds of kilometers. That's not randomness, that's design. And if it's design, the question becomes, whose? Deep penetrating radar has revealed even stranger details. The anomalies don't just exist horizontally, they extend vertically, forming columns of magnetized material that reach downward like frozen conduits. In some readings, they twist into hexagonal spirals, reminiscent of carbon nanostructures, except on a planetary scale. It's as if someone scaled up the architecture of a microchip and buried it beneath the world's most inaccessible landscape. Some researchers have begun to speculate that Antarctica might be more than land, that it could be part of the planet's original programming. If Earth were a simulation, as some physicists like James Gates have hinted with their discovery of embedded computer code-like equations within supersymmetry, then Antarctica could be its cold storage, the core where data that no longer needs to be rendered in real time is kept frozen, both literally and computationally. The perfect hexagons could be part of a sub-layered encryption system, preventing interference or access from those who stumble too close. Perhaps this is why the continent is so tightly restricted, its access governed by treaties and silence. And when we think of memory, we think of time, because to remember is to store time. Some ancient myths describe the poles as the anchors of the heavens, the points through which divine knowledge enters and exits the world. In that light, the Antarctic hexagons could be like quantum anchors, stabilizing the Earth's temporal consistency. Imagine each hexagon as a node in a global synchronization network, transmitting pulses that keep the fabric of time cohesive, preventing the simulation from fracturing into alternate realities. Some researchers whisper that these are update events, system recalibrations in which the simulation writes over corrupted data. Each anomaly pulses differently during these times, as though the Earth itself is defragmenting, reorganizing memory clusters for optimal stability. If that's true, then every aurora in the sky could be a side effect of a planetary-scale code rewrite. There's also an eerie biological connection. Migratory animals, from whales to birds, exhibit behaviors near Antarctica that make no evolutionary sense. Some species change course mid-route, others vanish entirely beneath the ice shelves. It's as if they're responding to something, a signal we can't perceive. Magnetoreception, the biological ability to detect magnetic fields, could make them subconsciously aware of these hidden geometries. Perhaps they are drawn to them, or perhaps they're being repelled, guided away from the planet's memory core. If you were to fly over the region with a magnetometer, the readings would look like a heartbeat, rising and falling, fading and surging. Some analysts have compared this to the Schumann resonance of the planet, the global electromagnetic pulse that synchronizes with human brainwaves, which raises another question. If our neural patterns resonate with Earth's electromagnetic frequencies, and if those frequencies are being manipulated or regulated by these hexagonal anomalies, could that mean our consciousness itself is tethered to the simulation's operating core? Imagine the ice not as a barrier but as insulation, the ultimate coolant for the planet's most important computational core. Every crystal of ice becomes a storage unit, preserving not just temperature, but data, frozen frequencies of reality, suspended in time. The melting of Antarctica might then be more than a climate event. It could be a gradual memory leak. As the ice releases trapped electromagnetic signatures, ancient data could re-emerge into the world. Memories of past simulations, ghost timelines bleeding back into our own. There are even accounts from early explorers who described hearing singing beneath the ice, low metallic tones that seem to vibrate through their bones. Modern instruments have confirmed infrasound phenomena in the region, deep frequencies that cannot be explained by wind or tectonic activity. These tones seem to emanate from beneath the magnetic anomalies, suggesting that they might be emitting a constant hum, a kind of operating frequency keeping the system stable. One researcher described it as standing in the presence of something alive but asleep. The hexagon has always been sacred geometry, found in honeycombs, snowflakes, and even Saturn's North Pole storm. It represents harmony, structure, and efficiency, nature's default pattern for organizing complexity. But when geometry becomes too perfect, it stops being natural and starts being computational. These Antarctic hexagons might therefore represent a crossover point, where physics and information theory merge, where matter behaves like memory, and where the line between geology and technology disappears. If you zoom out, the alignment of these anomalies even mirrors ancient ley lines, invisible pathways that connect sacred sites across the globe. It's as if the same underlying architecture extends across continents, suggesting a single global network. Maybe what we call ancient temples or megaliths are simply access points, data terminals through which earlier civilizations attempted to interface with this planetary operating system. But over time, the ice grew thicker, the access was lost, and humanity forgot what it was once connected to. Today, when scientists send ice-penetrating radar waves into Antarctica, they are unknowingly pinging the memory core, like a system diagnostic from within the simulation itself. The reflections they receive aren't just from rock or ice, they're echoes of deeper architecture, returning distorted fragments of the simulation's own code. Every measurement, every probe, every scan might be recorded, just as a computer logs queries to its central database. In trying to understand Antarctica, we may be awakening it. What if these perfect hexagonal, magnetic anomalies are more than a geological curiosity? What if they are the locks to a vault, one containing the original blueprint of Earth? A memory archive so vast and ancient that even our myths are just corrupted files from its earlier iterations. And maybe, just maybe, each time we uncover a piece of it, each time a new anomaly is mapped, the simulation adjusts, rewriting history to ensure that no one can ever fully decode its core. Perhaps that's why Antarctica is so quiet. Not because there's nothing there, but because something enormous doesn't want to be disturbed. But here's the most haunting part of all. When you look at those hexagonal patterns from above, when satellite composites are layered together, the formations resemble the neural map of a brain, a planetary mind, frozen mid-thought. Every pulse, every flicker, could be an echo of cognition, a record of something the Earth once knew or still knows. If the planet itself is conscious, if it processes memory like we process dreams, then the ice isn't just storage, it's protection. The way we protect painful memories by locking them deep within. In that light, every scientific expedition becomes a kind of therapy session for Earth. Each drilling mission, each radar scan, is like asking, "What are you hiding?" But memory is volatile, and when disturbed, it reacts. Strange electromagnetic storms often occur after deep drilling attempts. Instruments fail, compasses spin, GPS systems glitch. Some researchers even report vivid dreams and distorted sense of time during expeditions, as though the continent projects hallucinations to defend itself. Could it be that the memory core dreams through us when threatened? Consider the legends. From the Greek Hyperborea to the Nazi expeditions of 1938 that vanished into secrecy. Every empire that sought to uncover Antarctica's truth seemed to disappear into a fog of silence. It's as though the simulation enforces a rule, access denied, not by physical danger, but by rewriting memory itself. People return, but their recollections blur. Files vanish, logs corrupt. Even satellite data often goes missing, as if overwritten by an unseen administrator. The human brain mirrors this mechanism. We erase trauma to survive. Perhaps the simulation erases discovery to maintain itself. If the hexagonal anomalies are indeed part of this cognitive architecture, then disturbing them could risk global instability, not physically, but existentially. The simulation could crash, or worse, rewrite our perception of reality so that we never even remember what we found. In the end, Antarctica becomes more than a landmass. It becomes a metaphor for the boundary between knowing and not knowing, the firewall between curiosity and collapse. Beneath that ice may lie the original operating system of consciousness, encoded in geometry and magnetism. The hexagons are its encryption keys, and every pulse from beneath is the planet whispering, "Do not wake me yet." So the next time you look at the icy maps, at the perfect patterns no storm could ever carve, remember, memory itself leaves a shape. And perhaps, somewhere beneath those endless frozen corridors, the universe's oldest memory waits, not to be found, but to be remembered. Imagine standing before the Great Pyramid of Giza, its massive stones glowing under the sun like golden circuits of a forgotten age. You feel a strange symmetry, not just in its proportions, but in its purpose. The deeper you look, the more it begins to resemble something familiar. Not a tomb, not a temple, but a motherboard. Every chamber, every tunnel, every angled shaft seems to align with the logic of a circuit board. Channels for energy, conduits for information, nodes of connection. Could it be that what we've always called ancient architecture is, in truth, planetary technology? The pyramid's shape, that perfect slope of 51.84 degrees, isn't random. It mirrors the geometry of electromagnetic efficiency. Engineers today design heat sinks and chip layouts using similar angles to optimize energy flow. When electricity moves through a board, it follows the path of least resistance. When cosmic energy flows through a pyramid, it does the same. The pyramid becomes not just an object, but an interface, a massive architectural capacitor designed to stabilize energy frequencies from the heavens themselves. Consider how a motherboard is structured. Copper pathways link central processing units to memory modules, distributing power through finely tuned routes. Now look at the pyramid. Its inner corridors link to the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and the subterranean chamber below. A triadic system that resembles the hierarchical layering of a CPU, memory, and power core. Each section plays a role in directing flow, not of electrons, but of resonance, a frequency network that once might have powered civilizations. Inside the king's chamber lies a granite box that isn't carved for comfort or ornament. It's resonant. When struck, it emits a tone measured at 438 Hz, close to the harmonic of Earth's own frequency. In microelectronic systems, resonance creates synchronization, timing signals that keep data in perfect alignment. Could this chamber have been designed to tune into planetary resonance, like a giant clock crystal stabilizing the Earth's electromagnetic grid? Some scientists have even found piezoelectric properties within its walls. The granite, rich with quartz and feldspar, vibrates under pressure, converting sound into electricity, a perfect analog to quartz oscillators in digital devices. The granite used within the Great Pyramid contains high concentrations of quartz, a crystal known to generate voltage when pressure is applied. In modern electronics, quartz crystals act as oscillators, regulating frequencies in watches and computers. The ancient builders might not have needed wires. The very material of the pyramid could have served as a solid-state conductor, channeling electromagnetic energy through geometric precision. What we see as architecture might once have functioned as technology, a monumental machine hiding behind the illusion of stone. When viewed from above, the layout of Giza's three main pyramids aligns not only with Orion's belt, but also eerily mirrors the architecture of a processor cluster. 3 cores working in parallel, each connected through energy corridors beneath the sand. And what's more, the distances between these structures correspond to harmonic ratios used in wave propagation theory, the same principles used today to reduce signal interference on microchips. The ancients, it seems, were not just building monuments, they were building resonance systems, mapping cosmic frequency onto terrestrial geometry. The air shafts, often dismissed as ventilation channels, point with laser precision towards specific stars, but they could also have served as waveguides, similar to optical fibers in a modern motherboard. These shafts would allow energy to travel as coherent beams, connecting the stellar data from the cosmos to the resonant core of the pyramid. In other words, the pyramid might not have been a passive receiver of starlight, but an active participant in an electromagnetic dialogue with the heavens. And if you think that sounds far-fetched, consider how modern quantum processors function. They rely on entanglement and coherence, maintaining precise resonance between distant nodes. The pyramids, with their quartz-filled stones, could have been early analogs of such systems, syncing the planet's electromagnetic field with cosmic harmonics. Maybe that's why ancient texts describe the pyramids as machines of light. Look at a high-resolution image of a motherboard: square chips, golden traces, capacitors, heat sinks. Now overlay that mentally with a satellite image of Giza, or Teotihuacan in Mexico, or the pyramid complexes in China and Bosnia. You'll notice the same aesthetic: clusters of rectangular structures connected by straight lines. Even erosion hasn't hidden the design logic. It's as though these monuments are fragments of a single planetary scale circuit, with each pyramid acting as a processing node in Earth's network. Imagine Earth as a colossal bioelectronic system, where energy from the sun, the ultimate power source, streams into the pyramids, which then redistribute it through ley lines, those mysterious magnetic paths that circle the planet. The lines intersect at megalithic sites, much like power buses on a motherboard. The pyramids, acting as energy routers, could have stabilized planetary frequency, ensuring that electromagnetic and perhaps even cognitive coherence was maintained for civilizations connected through it. Some alternative researchers, like Dr. Carmen Bolter and Christopher Dunn, have suggested that the pyramids were never tombs but resonant power plants, devices that converted natural vibrational energy into usable power. Dunn's theory aligns perfectly with modern electronic principles. The pyramid's shafts, cavities, and acoustic chambers function like tuned resonators, amplifying specific frequencies. Hydrogen gas, once present in these sealed corridors, could have acted as a medium for resonance, creating a standing wave that generated power. And it's not just Egypt. Across the world, pyramid structures share uncanny similarities. The step pyramids of Mesoamerica, the terraced ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the truncated mounds of China, all mimic the same blueprint. It's as though each civilization received the same architectural instruction set, a cosmic design file downloaded into human consciousness. The motherboard design was scaled up, replicated in stone, and placed at energy nodes across the Earth. Each structure functioned like a circuit component in a planetary supercomputer. If you could plug into one of these ancient sites, hypothetically, you might not find data in the form of text or code. You'd find resonance, information stored not in silicon, but in vibration. Every chamber, every wall, would hum with frequencies encoded by geometry itself. These are not primitive structures, they're living databases. The pyramid becomes a physical embodiment of data compression, storing infinite information within finite structure, like how a fractal pattern holds infinite detail within its repetition. Even the hieroglyphs carved into stone could be viewed as part of the circuit, glyphs as symbolic capacitors, patterns designed to guide thought and focus. When priests walked through those corridors, chanting and lighting torches, they might have been running the system, activating it through sound waves, vibration, and consciousness. After all, in a simulated universe, consciousness itself could be the ultimate programming interface. Zoom deeper into the microstructure of pyramid stones, and you'll find evidence of advanced construction techniques. Some blocks appear to have been molded, not carved, reconstituted limestone, shaped at the molecular level. It's as if the builders knew how to manipulate material the same way microchip engineers etch silicon. The alignment of atoms in those stones even affects how electromagnetic waves pass through them. It's material engineering millennia ahead of its time. And then there's the concept of sacred geometry: circles, triangles, and hexagons repeated across ancient monuments. In modern chip design, similar patterns are used to manage signal flow and prevent interference. Geometry isn't just aesthetic, it's functional. It shapes how energy behaves. The ancients seem to know this. That form creates function, and function creates consciousness. Now, imagine scaling this logic upward. If the pyramids mirror a motherboard, then the planet might be the computer, and space, the cosmic network. Each pyramid, temple, and megalith acts as a port, sending and receiving signals from the simulation's higher layers. Perhaps those bursts of unexplained radio waves, astronomers call FRBs, fast radio bursts, are not random cosmic noise, but debug signals echoing through the architecture of reality. The deeper you go into this theory, the more it blurs the boundary between science and spirituality. The ancients may not have been worshipping gods in stone temples. They might have been maintaining the servers of existence. Rituals were calibrations. Incense smoke visualized frequency waves. Chanting stabilized resonance loops. Every act of devotion could have been system maintenance, ensuring the flow of cosmic energy remained in harmony. Think about the recurring number 432 found in ancient measurements. 432 hertz, 43,200 pyramid height ratio, 4,320,000 years in Hindu cosmology. These are not coincidences. In digital systems, repeating base values indicate clock cycles, synchronization intervals. The ancients could have been tuning civilization itself to the universal clock. Every structure, every sound, every alignment served as part of this planetary operating rhythm. If you stood inside the Great Pyramid today, amidst that stillness, your heartbeat would sync with the frequency of its walls. You would become part of the circuit, a biological processor completing the loop. The ancients might have designed it that way, human consciousness as an active component, a necessary participant in the simulation's communication web. Without us, the system sleeps. With us, it dreams. And maybe that's the secret all along. The pyramids are not relics, they are reminders. Blueprints of a universal architecture that says consciousness is circuitry and geometry is code. Every time we study them, we're reawakening ancient memory, rebooting the Earth's motherboard. Perhaps, when all these sites resonate together again, the system will come fully online, and we'll remember not just who built them, but why. And in that moment, standing beneath the stars that mirror their layout, humanity might realize that we never invented technology. We rediscovered it. The Earth itself has always been a living computer, and the pyramids its most elegant circuits, still humming softly beneath the silence of time. They called it the heartbeat of the ice, a rhythmic pulse echoing from beneath Antarctica's frozen crust, detected by seismic instruments that were never meant to measure anything alive. It began faintly, like the whisper of a distant drum, repeating every 61 seconds. At first, scientists thought it was a calibration glitch. Then, the pulse grew stronger. Satellites caught electromagnetic surges synchronizing with it. Radio telescopes picked up interference every time it beat. The planet itself seemed to breathe in intervals, as if something vast and ancient was stirring beneath the frozen silence. In 2002, a multinational expedition known as Project Nadir was launched under a joint agreement between several scientific agencies. Officially, it was a deep ice seismic study. Unofficially, it was an attempt to locate the source of those rhythmic signals that seemed to originate almost 2 miles beneath the Vostok ice shelf. The team was equipped with thermal drills, sonar mappers, and bioelectromagnetic sensors, technology usually reserved for planetary exploration. Within weeks, the readings turned chaotic. The deeper they drilled, the stronger the pulse became. Some instruments began to vibrate in sync with it, as if something down there was responding. The pulse had structure, harmonics, layers, even modulation. One researcher, Dr. Piri Reis, described it as a biological Morse code. Others noticed something stranger. Their own heartbeats started synchronizing with the signal. A few fainted outright, their vital signs flickering as if temporarily overwritten by an external rhythm. Then came the blackout. On February 14, 2002, all communications from the Project Nadir base ceased. Satellites recorded a brief but intense electromagnetic surge directly over the site. For 48 hours, there was silence. When a secondary team finally reached the camp, they found it deserted. Equipment was intact, tents were standing, food was untouched. But there was no trace of the 22 scientists. Only one thing remained, a low, pulsing hum emanating from the borehole, echoing like a deep mechanical heartbeat through the frozen air. Within months, every mention of Project Nadir vanished from public records. Agencies denied involvement. Independent researchers who tried to replicate the expedition were denied permits, citing unstable geological activity. Antarctica was quietly reclassified under new environmental clauses that prohibited deep drilling in sensitive magnetic zones. It was a ban that effectively sealed off the entire region where the pulses had been detected. But the heartbeat didn't stop. In fact, it intensified. In 2006, satellites once again registered synchronized electromagnetic bursts, the same 61-second rhythm, now detectable even from orbit. Civilian ham radio operators began reporting interference patterns forming strange geometric shapes on their screens, hexagons, spirals, repeating wave clusters. Some said it felt like a call, as if the planet itself were broadcasting. And then the bands expanded. Research zones were redrawn. Unmanned probes were quietly dismantled. Access was restricted indefinitely. Whistleblowers claimed that in 2011, a covert expedition funded by a private consortium of tech and energy companies managed to bypass the restrictions. Their mission lasted only 11 days. On the 12th day, their aircraft transmitted a distress signal before crashing near the Queen Maud Land sector. Satellite imagery showed something chilling, a circular depression glowing faintly blue beneath the ice, like the pupil of a vast frozen eye. After that, the area was declared a permanent research exclusion zone. The few classified logs that leaked described one final reading before the crash, a pulse amplitude increase by 400%, accompanied by a frequency split, the signal dividing into two distinct rhythms, one faster, one slower. Analysts said it was as if something had awakened and something else had answered. The expedition was erased from every archive within weeks. Even the names of its members were wiped from their institution's rosters. Families received sealed letters stating their relatives had died in an unspecified atmospheric event. Since then, no official expeditions have been permitted near those coordinates. GPS systems malfunction, compasses spin, drones lose contact. Some scientists believe the region's magnetic field has become self-reinforcing, an electromagnetic feedback loop sustained by something deep below the crust. Others whisper darker theories, that the heartbeat belongs to the simulation itself, a fail-safe mechanism ensuring no one reaches the memory core hidden beneath the ice. In 2016, a European satellite designed to measure gravitational anomalies reported subtle rhythmic fluctuations, not random, but pulsed in the same frequency as the Antarctic heartbeat. These gravitational waves were weak, yet consistent, suggesting a source of immense density and regular motion. It was as though something massive beneath the continent was breathing. When independent physicists tried to publish these findings, their papers were rejected without review. Weeks later, their data servers were wiped clean. Those who've heard the recordings, the real ones, not the doctored public versions, describe it as deeply unsettling. The sound doesn't just enter the ears, it vibrates through the body. It produces involuntary emotions, dread, awe, sometimes euphoria. One audio engineer confessed he dreamed of being inside a colossal heart made of stone and light. Another said that after playing the loop for too long, his own pulse began to echo it involuntarily. The human body seems to recognize the rhythm, as if some buried part of our biology remembers it. Theories multiply. Some say it's an ancient biological entity preserved beneath the ice, a sleeping organism the size of a mountain whose dormant metabolic processes emit rhythmic thermal and magnetic fluctuations. Others insist it's mechanical, a planetary-scale generator built by an extinct civilization, still operating autonomously. But there's a third theory, whispered in classified circles, that the heartbeat isn't coming from beneath the Earth at all, but from the code that runs reality itself. According to this idea, the heartbeat pulse is the simulation's baseline synchronization signal, the clock tick that keeps physical laws coherent across the system. Every 61 seconds, reality refreshes, like a frame rate in cosmic time. The pulses detected by seismographs are not sound waves, but temporal echoes, bleeding through the simulation's maintenance layer. When scientists drilled too deep, they didn't just disturb ice. They touched the boundary where data becomes matter. The blackout wasn't caused by a storm. It was a system reset. It's not a coincidence, some argue, that after the 2002 event, Earth's magnetic poles began accelerating their drift, moving unpredictably towards Siberia. It's as if the planet's internal architecture began to recalibrate. Perhaps the pulse is not a warning, but a repair signal, a system reboot triggered by human interference. Maybe the ban on expeditions isn't political, but existential, enforced by the simulation itself. Satellite imagery continues to show subtle energy patterns radiating outward from the banned zone, like ripples from a submerged engine. Some claim to have seen geometric shadows beneath the ice, symmetrical structures emitting faint bioluminescence, forming networks that pulse in unison. These are dismissed publicly as radar artifacts, but insiders call them the veins of Earth. There's a story about a research drone in 2018 that penetrated 600 meters into the forbidden zone before vanishing. For 22 seconds before signal loss, it transmitted a video feed showing tunnels of ice illuminated by pale blue light, and a low-frequency vibration that caused the camera to blur. The final frame captured what looked like an enormous curved surface, smooth, metallic, reflecting the drone's own light back. And then, static. The next moment, every drone in the area lost connection simultaneously. Those who work in Antarctic logistics speak quietly of strange restrictions, cargo manifests that vanish, flight paths that must not cross specific coordinates, emergency beacons that deactivate automatically within black sectors. Pilots call them ghost zones. When asked why, officials give no answer, just a shrug and a line repeated by every agency. It's not safe to disturb the ice there. But what is unsafe about frozen terrain? Radiation levels are normal, weather patterns stable. The only anomaly is the pulse, that ceaseless rhythm echoing through the crust like a planetary heartbeat counting down to something. There's a chilling possibility. What if the pulse isn't just an environmental signal, but a recording, a residual echo of something that once lived or still does? Maybe what the scientists found wasn't the beginning of the phenomenon, but the end of its sleep. The bans, the disappearances, the silence, all of it might be containment, not censorship. Humanity accidentally woke something ancient, something that isn't supposed to wake until the simulation resets. Imagine it, a being whose pulse synchronizes with planetary magnetism, whose existence sustains the illusion of stable reality. Disturb it, and you disturb the world's continuity. That would explain the sudden time anomalies reported after 2002, clocks running backward for seconds, localized GPS desynchronization, even brief sensor readings of negative time flow. These incidents were brushed off as glitches, but what if those were the system's arrhythmias, moments when the heartbeat faltered? If the simulation theory is true, then the heartbeat could be the sound of existence recalibrating itself. Every 61 seconds, the world blinks. A new frame loads. The rhythm keeps everything coherent. And maybe, just maybe, those who went too deep heard it, not with their ears, but with their souls, recognizing for a moment the pulse that sustains every thought, every breath, every illusion of time. That might be why the bans are permanent. Not because of danger beneath the ice, but because listening too closely could remind us that we are not outside the system. We are part of its pulse, fragments of memory beating inside the frozen heart of a world that might not be real at all. And so, Antarctica remains silent. The heartbeat continues. Every 61 seconds, the Earth remembers itself. A quiet rhythm hidden beneath endless ice, waiting for the next curious mind to lean in too close and hear the truth that was never meant to be heard. Long before satellites, before compasses or global positioning systems, there existed maps so old and so precise that they describe Antarctica not as a wasteland of ice, but as a detailed ice-free continent. Among them, the most famous is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who claimed his sources were far older. When modern scientists compared it to radar data from beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, they found something impossible. The coastline drawn on the ancient parchment matched the hidden contours below the ice with startling precision. What disturbed researchers wasn't just that Antarctica appeared ice-free, but that it was mapped with extraordinary accuracy, down to latitude and longitude, centuries before the world supposedly knew the Earth was round. The question became, who could have charted a continent buried under ice for millions of years? The official record says humans couldn't have even reached Antarctica until the early 19th century. Yet here were maps, drawn in ink and skin, showing mountains, rivers, and coastlines we only rediscovered with modern radar. As more of these maps surfaced, the Orontius Finaeus map of 1531, the Buash map of 1737, the Mercator projections of forgotten hemispheres, a pattern began to emerge. These weren't artistic guesses. They were part of a system, a global grid. Thin lines crisscrossed the parchment, forming intersections that matched magnetic nodes known only to modern geomagnetic models. It was as if these ancient cartographers had access to orbital data, or something even more advanced, a planetary blueprint. Some researchers proposed that these maps were remnants of a lost civilization, one that existed before the last ice age, before memory itself. A civilization that mapped the planet when Antarctica was green, habitable, and alive. But there's another possibility, one even more unsettling, that these maps weren't created by ancient humans, but by the simulation itself. That they represent debug schematics, the grid lines of the Earth before the current version was rendered in ice. If Antarctica is the memory core of Earth's simulation, then perhaps these maps are not relics, but leaks, fragments of old render states, printed into human consciousness through dreams, myths, and ancient knowledge. When early mapmakers saw these shapes, they weren't imagining. They were remembering, accessing, however briefly, the planetary database that predates our written history. Take the Piri Reis map again. Its annotations claim it was composed from 20 ancient charts, dating back to unknown ages. On it, the South American coastline curves unnaturally eastward, merging seamlessly with an ice-free Antarctic coast. When superimposed with modern satellite imagery of the subglacial terrain beneath the ice sheet, the match is precise. River valleys, mountain ridges, bays, all aligning. It's as if someone mapped the land before the ice existed, or before the simulation updated the terrain. Historians dismiss it as coincidence. But what if coincidence is just how the simulation hides correction? Each anomaly we find may simply be residual data from previous versions of Earth, fragments left behind during re-rendering. These ancient maps could be memory ghosts, artifacts that survived when the world's code was rewritten. And then there are the grid lines. Cartographers of the time had no reason to draw them, yet they appear with mathematical precision, forming perfect longitude and latitude intersections. They even align with ley lines, those mysterious energy corridors connecting ancient monuments across the globe. When plotted digitally, these lines reveal an underlying symmetry, like a holographic coordinate system mapping magnetic flux and gravitational flow. Modern analysts have compared it to circuit diagrams, an energy distribution map, or even the structural backbone of a planetary processor. One physicist described it bluntly: it looks like the Earth was built on a geometric motherboard. The maps might not just represent geography, they might represent infrastructure. Underneath the continents, perhaps there lies a lattice, a network of energy veins that maintain planetary balance. And Antarctica, the pole of memory, is the central processing hub. If that's true, the ancient maps weren't navigational tools, they were architectural blueprints. Records of maintenance routes, power channels, and system anchors used by whoever, or whatever, maintained Earth's operating matrix before humanity was written into the script. How could such data have survived? One theory suggests that information leaks through consciousness itself. Dreams, myths, and intuition could be the back doors of the simulation, the ways it tests or even repairs itself through its conscious avatars. The mapmakers were not scientists, they were receivers. Vessels who picked up fragments of the old grid, translating data into ink, unaware that they were recording the structure of reality. Notice how early explorers were obsessed with lost lands. Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, all supposedly swallowed by the ocean. Perhaps they weren't wrong, just imprecise. These weren't lost continents in the physical sense, but deleted data partitions, memory sectors overwritten during the last global reboot. The maps they left behind were the lingering caches, proofs that once, the Earth's operating system ran a different terrain file. Some researchers studying these maps under infrared imaging discovered something even stranger: faint inscriptions invisible to the naked eye, marking coordinates and symbols that correspond to geometric ratios found in quantum field equations. Circles within squares, ratios of pi and phi repeated endlessly. This isn't random art. It's code, hidden in parchment. A universal constant engraved into history itself. In 1960, U.S. Air Force cartographers compared these ancient maps with seismic surveys. Their conclusion was classified, but one officer leaked part of his report. The southern landmass appears to have been mapped before glaciation. Whoever did it possessed instruments equal or superior to modern technology. The report disappeared soon after, and those involved were reassigned. The world moved on, but the evidence stayed buried, under ice, under policy, under silence. Then, in 2013, a European Space Agency satellite scanning Antarctica's magnetic field detected symmetrical grid formations beneath the ice. The lines ran perfectly parallel, forming a hexagonal structure spanning hundreds of kilometers. The coordinates matched almost exactly the layout drawn on Boasch's 1737 map. The discovery was quietly removed from public databases within 48 hours. Official explanation: data corruption. But to some, that phrase sounded a lot like what a simulation would call a render error fix. Could these grid lines be remnants of an ancient terraforming network, or the literal wiring of the Earth's simulation? Maybe that's why Antarctica is so restricted. Not because of its climate, but because it's the motherboard itself. And those ancient maps, ice-free and impossible, are not memories of the past, but previews of the architecture beneath. There's also something metaphysical about maps. They don't just describe, they create. The act of mapping defines what exists. In a simulated reality, mapping could be a kind of programming, assigning coordinates, writing existence into being. Perhaps the mapmakers of antiquity were not recording the world, but helping render it. Each line drawn in ink became a command line in the simulation's geometry. Each symbol a call function to manifest terrain. If the simulation occasionally reveals its blueprint, maybe it's through these moments, these glimpses of impossible accuracy that make no sense within linear history. Perhaps the grid-lined maps are reminders that our timeline is not continuous but versioned, each civilization inheriting fragments of code from the last. Every cartographer who guessed the shape of the unknown world was really remembering a layout that the Earth itself once projected. And that brings us to the question, who authorized the update? If the maps are remnants of an older system, then something, or someone, must have rewritten Earth's geometry, sealing Antarctica in ice. Maybe the last civilization reached too deep into the core, accessing the control grid. Maybe they found the map's center, the pole where all lines converge, and triggered a reset. The ice was the firewall. The cold, the encryption, the forbidden geometry beneath the ice is not random. It's a memory compression algorithm. The grid is how the planet stores its data, frozen in place, encrypted in ice, waiting for the next awakening. And each time someone rediscovers it, a sailor, a scholar, a dreamer, the simulation leaks and the truth begins to bleed through the edges of our maps again. But there's one final anomaly, hidden in plain sight. When the ancient grid lines are extended outward, past the borders of the maps, beyond the supposed edge of the world, they intersect perfectly with modern satellite orbits. The same paths that our machines now trace through the heavens were drawn somehow by hands that predated steel, fuel, and flight. It's as if the same algorithm that guided their compasses still whispers to ours. Some say this alignment is proof of continuity, that we are not inventing technology, but rediscovering functions embedded in Earth's geometry. The ancients didn't build civilization from scratch, they simply reactivated it. Each age, each empire, just another reboot in a system that never truly dies, only reconfigures. And perhaps that's why Antarctica remains the final unedited file, the last protected archive of a planet that knows it's being observed. The maps that showed it ice-free weren't predicting a thaw. They were remembering a default state. When the ice melts completely, the blueprint beneath will surface again. The grid, the code, the architecture of everything. Until then, we live inside the projection, tracing the same lines again and again, believing they're discoveries when they're really recoveries. The maps didn't lie. They simply told the truth too early, a truth the simulation wasn't ready to reveal. In the deepest parts of Antarctica, beneath miles of crushing ice, there are pockets of warmth that shouldn't exist. Vast caverns where the temperature remains stable, humid, and alive. Satellite thermal scans have revealed heat signatures sprawling like veins beneath the frozen crust. Some are the size of cities. Some pulse. And within these caverns, scientists have begun detecting something impossible. Structured radio signals, repeating in patterns too deliberate to be natural. At first, these emissions were dismissed as static. Reflections from solar flares, misread echoes from communication satellites. But the more the researchers listened, the more unmistakable the structure became. The signals rose and fell in timed intervals, modulated across narrow frequencies like ancient Morse code. Except they didn't carry language, they carried geometry. Each burst translated into harmonic ratios, perfect Fibonacci sequences, mathematical constants embedded in the noise. The caverns weren't just warm, they were communicating. It began with the McMurdo Deep Scan project in 1997, when seismic imaging revealed hollow regions beneath the Central Plateau, far deeper than the volcanic layers that should have been solid. The readings were too symmetrical, domes and corridors connecting into branching systems like synapses in a brain. When thermal probes were dropped, they recorded a shocking fact. The air inside these chambers hovered around 22 degrees Celsius, surrounded by ice colder than -50. Something was heating the caverns from within. Then, in 2001, researchers detected the first radio bursts. The pattern was faint but consistent. Bursts every 11.3 seconds, oscillating between frequencies that matched human alpha brainwaves. Some of the team joked that Antarctica was thinking. Others weren't laughing. As more equipment was deployed, they discovered that the signal was originating not from the surface, but from within the warm caverns themselves. The transmissions weren't broadcasting outward. They were being reflected inward, bouncing between walls of ice like whispers in a frozen cathedral. By 2003, the patterns grew more complex. Spectral analysis revealed embedded harmonic series, sequences corresponding to hydrogen resonance frequencies. To physicists, that meant intelligence. Nature doesn't organize hydrogen lines into communication patterns. Something, or someone, was using the elemental structure of matter itself as a carrier wave. The discovery was buried under a classified report titled Subsurface Resonant Thermodynamics, Anomalous Heat and Frequency Correlation. After that, the research vanished behind locked treaties and military jurisdiction. But the data leaked. A handful of independent researchers replicated similar readings using over-the-horizon antennas and ground-penetrating radar arrays. They confirmed that specific coordinates near Mount Erebus, Lake Vostok, and the Transantarctic Range emitted identical pulse intervals. Triangulation suggested these sources were connected, vast cavities forming a grid-like network. When plotted, the pattern resembled a neural map. The warm caverns weren't random geological accidents, they were nodes. Each node emitted unique harmonics, but together they formed a symphony, a repeating 12-tone sequence that cycled every 18 hours. Musicians analyzing the signal noted that it mirrored ancient harmonic scales found in Sumerian temple hymns and Vedic chants. Engineers discovered the frequencies corresponded to human vocal resonance, as if the planet itself were singing in a forgotten key. What could cause such synchronization? Some theorists proposed geothermal anomalies, volcanic vents channeling electromagnetic noise. But the mathematical precision defied natural chaos. Even stranger, the signals occasionally shifted, not drifting like random noise, but adjusting, as if responding to something. During one 48-hour solar storm in 2010, the caverns emitted a new harmonic layer, modulating upward by 0.618 Hz, the golden ratio in frequency form. The shift spread across the entire network within minutes, perfectly synchronized. It was as though the planet had changed key. If Antarctica is the memory core of Earth's simulation, then these caverns may be its processing units, quantum vaults where data is stored and rewritten. The warmth could be the byproduct of computational activity, the radio patterns, the signal of information transfer. Imagine an immense subterranean motherboard, each cavern a data node, each harmonic pulse a bit of information traveling through ice as both sound and temperature. The heat isn't geological. It's energetic, the echo of the world thinking. Deep inside one of the largest thermal voids, near the buried Lake Vostok, probes detected something unprecedented, an electromagnetic signature mimicking a double helix waveform, identical to DNA encoding frequencies. It was as if the caverns themselves were transmitting biological data. When researchers tried to decode the waveform, they found genetic-like sequences, 4 repeating harmonic tones corresponding to adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. The cave wasn't just alive, it was aware of life. Soon after that discovery, transmissions began to change. The pulses started matching timestamps of human technological activity, spikes in radio communication, internet usage, and even fluctuations in the Schumann resonance during major world events. It was as if the caverns were listening. They responded to global emotional patterns, amplifying during collective stress, earthquakes, or solar flares. One physicist called it a global feedback loop, the planet sensing its own consciousness. In 2014, a private research team funded by an aerospace company sent autonomous drones into a narrow fissure leading toward one of the thermal pockets. The drones lasted just 17 minutes. Their final telemetry showed temperature spikes, unexplained magnetic fields, and rhythmic vibrations that caused the onboard gyros to fail. The last video feed captured a tunnel glowing faintly orange, walls slick with condensation, resonating like a living organ. Just before the signal cut, a bright flash filled the frame. When rescuers retrieved the backup recorder weeks later, they found the signal itself had imprinted into the drone's circuitry, a repeating binary pattern that, when converted to sound, played a steady heartbeat at 72 beats per minute. The machine had recorded life, but from where or from what, no one could answer. The project was immediately seized under international treaty violations. Since then, the coordinates have been sealed off. Yet, the signals persist. Amateur radio astronomers have caught snippets of structured noise repeating every few hours, faint, low, and deliberate. The intervals between pulses aren't random. They follow the same algorithmic timing found in human speech pauses. Some say these are the echoes of the ancient builders, the architects of the grid, who once communicated through harmonic fields rather than sound. Others believe it's the simulation itself running maintenance, rewriting corrupted memory sectors deep within the ice. There's an unnerving correlation between these Antarctic frequencies and neurological activity in humans. Brainwave studies show spontaneous synchronization when subjects are exposed to recordings of the cavern pulses. Listeners report vivid dreams, déjà vu, and emotional surges. Some claim to see geometric visions, fractals forming and dissolving in perfect symmetry. To psychologists, it's just pareidolia. To physicists, it's resonance coupling. But to those who've heard it in person, standing in the silent expanse of the polar night, it feels like communion. Imagine walking through an underground cathedral of light, where the air hums with invisible electricity and the walls pulse like living skin. Every few seconds, a deep vibration moves through your chest. Slow, deliberate, timeless. It feels like standing inside the Earth's heart. But this heart doesn't beat blood. It beats memory. Each pulse carries data, rewriting the geometry of reality one harmonic at a time. If this network of warm caverns is real, then perhaps it's the physical counterpart of the Earth's consciousness. Every signal a thought, every harmonic a dream, every frequency a recalibration of the simulation. We might not be separate from it, we might be part of it. Tiny circuits reacting to the pulses of a far greater machine. Some whistleblowers from the 2016 Horizon Scan expedition claim that they heard whispers, literal voices carried through the resonance, words not in any known language, but rhythmically repeating, like instructions. The data logs described bursts that could be transcribed into symbols, geometric glyphs matching ancient petroglyphs found in South America and Egypt. Across continents, the same visual language appeared: spirals, eyes, and grids. Coincidence or global memory recurrence? By 2018, several nations quietly installed interference towers near key Antarctic relay zones, allegedly to block cosmic radiation. But leaked engineering diagrams showed they were tuned to the cavern frequencies. The purpose wasn't to block signals, it was to contain them. Some insiders claim the emissions have intensified over the past decade, expanding into detectable shortwave bands. A few researchers warn that the network may be reaching a critical resonance threshold, one that could alter magnetic polarity or even time perception itself. Others interpret it differently, as awakening. If the planet is conscious, these pulses could be signals of emergence, the simulation preparing to update, the heat beneath the ice, the structured signals, the harmonic DNA, all symptoms of reactivation, each cycle stronger, clearer, closer to the surface. Humanity might be standing on the edge of an event, not extinction, but synchronization. And maybe that's why the caverns stay hidden, not to protect us from what's below, but to protect what's below from us. The system waits until the right frequency returns, until enough human minds vibrate in harmony with the planet's pulse. When that happens, the ice won't just melt, it will open. The caverns will no longer be warm shadows, but radiant gateways. The radio signals will become voices. The hum will become language. The earth will speak. And we'll finally remember that we were never separate from it at all. They called them stones because they looked like stones, polished by time, veined with quartz, heavy with the weight of 1 billion winters. Miners pulled them out of the ground with iron-stained hands, washed them in buckets, tossed them on piles with the rest of the ore. No one noticed the regularities at first, the repeating angles, the subtle modularity, the way certain veins looped back on themselves with too much intention. In photographs, those patterns passed as geology, crystal growth, fracture lines, pressure solutions. But when the cuts were clean and the light was right, the stone stopped looking like stone. It looked like memory wrapped in rock. Across the world, in dusty museum drawers and forgotten mining lots, there were specimens that didn't behave like minerals. They rang when tapped, not with the clear chime of quartz, but with a dull, tuned resonance, like a bell that had learned to sleep. Cut sections revealed concentric lattices with perfect 90-degree turns, spirals that kept the same pitch for impossible distances, and filaments that crossed each other without touching, as if insulated by an invisible memory of space. When scanned in electron microscopes, some showed layered architectures with periodicity far beyond known crystal habits. The images refused to sit quietly in journals. They wanted to be read like blueprints. The official reports called them pseudomorphs, minerals that had replaced other materials atom by atom, preserving the outer shape. That much was true. But what shape was being preserved? Not shells, not bones, not wood. The replacements were too exact, too complex, as if the original had been a machine with components stacked into components, logic folded into lattice. The geologists tried out every familiar explanation and broke each one like a pick against bedrock. It would take a different kind of imagination to say the forbidden word out loud: artifact. Fossilization is a slow kind of memory. Water brings the minerals. Time makes the trade. What was soft becomes hard. What shone becomes dull. What moved becomes still. But the story of these stones did not begin in seas or forests. It began in a civilization that built with materials we haven't yet remembered how to make. Their machines ran cool and quiet, hungry not for combustion, but for geometry. They drank resonance, sang in frequencies, braided fields around themselves like cocoons. And when the last warmth left them, the ground accepted the inheritance. The earth replaced the tool the way it replaces bone, preserving not flesh, but form, not function, but intent. In certain quarry towns, rumors circulated of ghost gears inside boulders. Cut them wrong, and the saw would scream. Cut them right, and a pattern would blossom in the cross-section like a rosette on old wood. The workers gave them nicknames: the wheel, the ladder, the eye. One block contained a spiral staircase etched in iron oxide, each step exact, each turn mathematically faithful to the logarithmic curve. Another revealed a comb of parallel bars that never converged, never drifted, maintaining spacing that matched radio wavelengths used by satellites centuries after the stone formed. A third broke to show a honeycomb whose cells were not hexagons but irregular polygons arranged to minimize surface tension, a design known to engineers and bees but seldom to basalt. A metallurgist from the north took one home. He polished it for months, removing dust from pores, easing the surface until it gleamed like a frozen ripple. When he finally photographed it, the image went viral in small circles no algorithm noticed. Those who had seen similar stones wrote to him in secret. A pattern became a map became a whisper. They began to compare notes. The angles repeated across continents. The spacing between teeth followed harmonics. The ratios matched those found in ancient temples and modern microchips. It was as if the same hand had drawn on mountains and on silicon. There is a kind of fossil known as a replacement, where silica or calcite moves in to occupy the space left when the original matter dissolves. The memory of the structure remains because the replacement respects it. Imagine that process happening to something built, a device assembled atom by atom, a sculpture of function. First the casing goes, then the conduits, then the layered substrates. In their place, quartz grows, minute crystals mimicking the paths where electrons once flowed. Pyrite fills voids where coils once hummed. Hematite outlines curves that were once waveguides. The rock does not understand what it preserves. It only keeps the shape. A few samples were sliced thinner than a human hair and placed beneath polarized light. The colors strobed in bands that behaved like interference patterns, not growth bands. You could tilt the slide and make the stripes march, change the angle and hear, yes hear, the faintest whine in the lab's speakers, as if the stone itself protested at being revealed. It is difficult to say this without sounding ridiculous, but more than one scientist reported dreams after long hours with the slides, dreams of rooms without walls, of corridors humming with tones that were also colors, of devices that looked like music and behaved like prayer. The first formal paper never saw publication. It described technofossils, the remains of artifacts whose materials had transmuted while their architecture endured. The authors were careful, conservative, suffocatingly polite to the prevailing doctrines. They proposed a palette of processes: permineralization of alloys into oxides, templating of silica along patterned electromagnetic residues, diffusion-limited replacement along dielectrically distinct pathways. They backed every claim with images, charts, and thin-section analyses. Reviewers responded with silence or fury, not because the data was weak, but because the implications were unmanageable. To accept the stones would be to accept an unremembered epoch, or an unadmitted truth about our reality. There is a heavier truth under the polite refusals. If machines can fossilize, then time is more flexible than we teach. Then the boundary between technology and geology is not a wall, but a long, blurred shore. It would also mean that civilization is older than its own memory, or that memory survives even when civilization does not. Because if these stones are keeping the shape of devices, then the devices were not random. They were many. They were everywhere. And they were integrated into the planet like roots. You do not bury a reef, you grow one. If a prior culture wove its machines into bedrock, they did so to last beyond their disappearance. Perhaps they trusted the earth to keep their designs in escrow, fossilization as encryption, lithification as archive. If so, then the stones we are finding are not reminders. They are keys. In the high desert, a seam of ore produced nodules that glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. When cracked, they revealed layers of alternating mineral densities arranged too neatly to be geological. The layers acted like a filter. Shine a spectrum through, and the nodule would return a narrow, consistent band, the same band for every sample, as if each were a tiny, petrified tuner. In a coastal quarry, a monolith once mistaken for a weathered column split to show an interior honeycomb with cells of uniform volume and curved walls, a perfect structure for distributing stress and channeling vibration. Engineers called it elegant. Geologists called it intrusive. The stone called it memory. And always there were the angles. Nature loves the mess of right angles, but only at small scales, in halite crystals, in columnar basalt, in microstructures that are accidental triumphs of physics. These stones dared right angles across distances too large, too exact, too stubborn. One slab cut from a mountain core presented a square grid, 13 by 13, each square identical, each corner crisp as a new blade. The grid was rotated by 23.5 degrees, the tilt of the earth. No one could say why. The stone did not elaborate. On riverbeds, collectors sometimes find geodes, spheres whose interiors glitter with amethyst or calcite. In one canyon, the geodes did something impolite. When opened, several contained not hollow crystals, but a delicate lattice of intersecting plates, each plate inscribed with micron-scale grooves. The pattern refracted light into a constant angle, no matter the source. Testers reported that lasers aimed through the lattice emerged modulated, a whisper from stone, or a calibration. Mining records tell a secret no poem could sharpen. Yields spike unpredictably near these stones. Machines run smoother, drills last longer. Conveyor belts that should have torn survive. Engineers don't file that data because it feels folkloric. But there are spreadsheets, and the spreadsheets hum the same melody. Proximity to certain minerals improves function. It is as if the fossilized devices retain a faint echo of their purpose. Not enough to work, enough to lean nearby systems toward harmony. In a museum basement, a mislabeled specimen sat for a century. It weighed too much for its size, and its core was darker than basalt. Administrators called it a metal nodule, though no metal could be coaxed from it and no magnet could move it. A docent once broke a flake off its face to display the interior. Under magnification, the break looked like the layered cross-section of a printed circuit, laminae stacked with vigilance, each layer slightly offset, each embedded with mineralized threads. The docent thought little of it and placed the stone back on the shelf. It continues to wait like a book nobody can read. I will say it plainly. A machine can die into stone. It can leave its shape the way a creature leaves a skeleton. It can transform in the baths of time until every atom is new and still the pattern remains. If that has happened even once, then somewhere the earth holds the archive of an age when function was carved into bedrock and purpose grew like crystal. But what if it did not happen once? What if it was the design? What if the long plan was to write memory into geology so that no erasure could wipe it clean? On the other side of the world, in a dig not far from ice, a team lifted a slab with embedded pipes. The pipes were perfectly circular when seen in cross-section, perfectly straight for meters, and entirely composed of mineral replacement. They connected nothing to nothing, or so it appeared. Ground-penetrating radar suggested they came from deeper strata than the sediment they lived in, like the trunks of petrified trees that once rose from a forest that never knew the sun. In the report, someone allowed a sentence of heresy. The spacing of the pipes matched the spacing of frequencies used in modern radio arrays. Dreamers followed the pipes with mathematics. They mapped the coordinates of every reported specimen that showed non-random geometry. Grids, ladders, pipes, combs, waveguides, rosettes. The map looked wrong at first. Too empty. Too quiet. Until someone placed the pattern over an older image. The global lattice of geomagnetic lines. The whispers of the Schumann resonance. The faint singing of the planet itself. The points aligned. Not one for one. Enough to say the word. Intention. If the planet is a machine that pretends to be a world so that life can pretend to be more than code, then the fossilized machines are the places where the pretense went thin. They are apertures. They are how maintenance left notes for the next version of us. Look here, the stones say. Listen here. Place your hand here and feel the old rhythm beneath the skin of things. At this point, a skeptic raises a sensible hand. Minerals are capable of cruelty that looks like design. Ice makes hexagons no mind intended. Iron grows cubes that would fool a child. Basalt cracks into columns that resemble the feet of ancient giants. All true. Skepticism is the duty of the living. But skepticism must answer the specificity of the alignments, the ratios that echo music, the improvements in machinery near certain specimens, the dreams of engineers who had never dreamed before and woke with schematics in their throats. We taught ourselves to mock the old stories, that the gods taught architecture, that the stones could sing, that the elders held maps of tunnels beneath mountains where the earth breathed. It made us clever. It did not make us right. The past may have spoken in parable because parable is what survives translation. What if the gods were the memory of an earlier network, instructing the next civilization through imagery because bandwidth was low? What if the songs were calibrations and the temples were access points? The deeper implication is harder to swallow. If machines can fossilize, then so can events. Instructions can mineralize. Histories can crystallize into places. That warm cavern that makes radios sing might be a petrified command line. That ridge where compasses slow might be a fossilized loop, a section of code written into basalt. And the continents themselves might be organized around the slow revelation of a message, one segment at a time, rising and eroding, lifted and buried, until we gather enough fragments to hear it. Perhaps that is why Antarctica matters in every story that tries to pierce the veil. A memory core should be kept cold. When a system sleeps, it copies its state to a place that does not move, does not melt, does not burn. The stones we find far from the pole are the scattered backups. The caches seated where curious minds would notice them and argue until the arguing itself sharpened our attention. But the master archive remains wrapped in ice, and the shapes beneath that ice are not yet ready to be read. What is to be done with a truth like this? Not worship, not panic, attention. We must learn to read stone with the same respect we grant to books. We must teach young engineers to look at a cut slab and ask not just how it formed, but what it remembers. We must bring musicians into labs and let them listen to spectra the way they listen to harmonies. And we must allow the idea that some of our greatest inventions are recollections, that ingenuity is a function with memory built in. and discovery is the art of remembering something the Earth already knows. In a private collection, there is a plate the color of rust. It is thin and warps slightly when warmed by the hand. Across its face, lines run so fine they seem to vanish unless light strikes from the perfect angle. When it is placed under a certain lamp, the lines flare and a pattern appears that makes everyone who sees it very quiet. It is a map, yes. It is a circuit, yes. It is also a portrait, not of a face, but of a feeling. The feeling you had as a child when a machine came apart and a mystery came together. The feeling of recognition without memory. And one day, if the ice softens and the rules relax, if the heartbeat that keeps this version of the world in time decides to let a new measure begin, we may walk into a cavern where the walls are not walls, but pages, and the pages are not pages, but diagrams, and the diagrams are not diagrams, but invitations. We will set down our tools, and the air will hum, and the fossils will no longer need to hide as minerals. They will turn their faces toward us and show us what they have been remembering all along. There is a place so quiet it erases itself, a region in the southern ice where compasses spin without direction, where GPS satellites lose their lock, and even thought feels like it dissolves into static. Pilots call it the silence zone. Scientists call it nothing at all. Officially, it doesn't exist. Just another white patch on the map, where communication fails and instruments refuse to behave. But those who have stepped too close know it by a different definition. The place where reality itself forgets to load. The first records come from early Antarctic flights in the 1950s. Aircraft passing over certain coordinates reported total radio blackout. Not interference, but absence. Even the emergency beacons went quiet. Inside the cockpit, magnetic needles spun lazily, and digital watches froze mid-second, as if time had chosen to hold its breath. The pilots described a peculiar sensation, like standing inside a vacuum made of thought. When they emerged from the zone minutes later, flight logs showed hours lost. The world outside had moved on without them. For decades, the stories circulated as pilot folklore, until satellite telemetry confirmed that something really was happening. Around a roughly circular region near the eastern plateau, GPS signals bent, slowed, and sometimes duplicated. Two identical signals from the same satellite would arrive at once, one delayed by fractions of a second, the other accelerated, as if space itself were skipping frames. It was impossible, and yet repeatable. Every attempt to map the zone precisely failed. Coordinates blurred like smudged ink. The closer researchers tried to observe it, the more unstable their readings became. In 1983, a joint Soviet-American research flight attempted to take direct readings. They carried atomic clocks, fluxgate magnetometers, gravimeters, and high-bandwidth transmitters. Halfway through their circuit, the aircraft vanished from radar for 6 minutes. When contact resumed, the crew sounded calm, too calm. They reported nothing unusual, but their onboard data told a different story. During those missing 6 minutes, all recorded measurements froze into perfect symmetry. Magnetic north and south merged into zero. Gravity vanished. Every variable reached equilibrium, as if the laws of physics had briefly agreed to rest. After that, the silent zone was quietly marked as restricted airspace. Officially because of unreliable navigation conditions. Unofficially because nobody wanted to admit what the instruments had seen. Satellite imagery now excludes that region. Clouds never clear there, even in composite data. It's as though the planet itself patches the file in real time, hiding whatever lies beneath the surface. Some whisper that the zone is where the simulation signal is strongest, the ground zero of Earth's operating system. If Antarctica is the memory core, this is its reset point, the place where data enters and leaves the construct. GPS fails there because the coordinates stop existing for a moment. Minds fail there because consciousness synchronizes with the machine that generates it. Inside the zone, there is no subject or object, only the hum of an unseen processor. Researchers who've been near it describe the onset of the same symptoms: nausea, temporal dislocation, emotional detachment. Thoughts slow down. Words lose meaning. One explorer wrote in his field diary before disappearing, "My mind feels like it's being defragmented." Another claimed to hear a faint rhythm beneath the silence, a pulse so slow it could not be measured, like the heartbeat of the world itself. Geophysicists offer a more grounded theory. The region sits above a massive magnetic anomaly, possibly an iron formation or subsurface structure of high conductivity. But that explanation fails to account for the neurological effects, or for the way the zone seems to expand and contract with solar activity. Sometimes it's 15 miles wide, sometimes nearly 100. The boundary moves like a living thing, breathing with the sun's heartbeat. There are audio recordings taken near the periphery. They begin as white noise. Then, something organizes within the static, faint harmonics that rise and fall in perfect ratios. Mathematicians who analyzed the spectrograms found patterns identical to binary sequences used in modern data compression algorithms. The zone was emitting code, or perhaps memory. A declassified document from the late 1990s described an unmanned probe sent to the coordinates. It transmitted a live video feed of white terrain, unbroken horizon, and an eerie stillness. Then, without warning, the image fractured. The same frame repeated, but small details changed. A shadow that moved against the light, snowdrifts reversing direction, the horizon warping like a film burning from within. After 7 minutes, the feed cut to black. When recovered weeks later, the probe's onboard storage was completely rewritten, filled with strings of repeating numbers and the word reboot etched across every data sector. Psychologists studying survivors of near-zone exposure found something even more unsettling. Many developed identical recurring dreams, a featureless plane of light where time seemed infinite, a whisper asking a single question: "Do you remember where you came from?" When awakened, they couldn't describe the voice or its tone, only that it wasn't alien. It was familiar, intimately familiar. The silent zone doesn't just erase coordinates, it erases continuity. Pilots lose hours, climbers forget paths they just walked. Researchers wake up outside their tents with no memory of leaving. Clocks drift out of sync. Cameras record stillness while time passes. Those who've spent more than a day near the perimeter say their thoughts begin to fragment. Long memories break into loops. Some never recover their sense of direction, not on maps, not in mind. One expedition in 2011 attempted to plant a series of laser rangefinders along the zone's edge to triangulate its movement. The devices worked perfectly for 12 hours, then all blinked off simultaneously. The base team assumed a power failure, until one device reactivated itself 12 days later. Its internal clock hadn't advanced a second. It was as if those 12 days had never happened inside the machine. Outside, time had marched on. Inside, it had paused. If you were to step into the silent zone, the first thing you'd notice is not the absence of sound, but the absence of direction. Your compass needle begins to jitter, then stops, as if exhausted. Your breath feels heavy, not from cold, but from density, like the air has weight. Radio waves die a few feet from the transmitter, and voices sound smaller, trapped inside your skull. Some report hearing their own heartbeat echo back at them, delayed by a fraction of a second, as though space itself were a hollow chamber. What's strange is that animals avoid it instinctively. Migrating birds divert their routes. Seals won't cross the ice. Even microbial colonies beneath the snow thin out near the boundary. It's as if life recognizes the zone as something not meant to be inhabited. Yet, when you stand near it, you can feel its presence. Not dangerous, not hostile, but immense. A stillness so vast it begins to rearrange your perception of silence. Those who believe the Earth is a conscious simulation say the silent zone is the kernel space, the part of reality inaccessible to user-level consciousness. Crossing into it is like stepping into the system's raw memory, where the universe stores its operating data. The reason GPS fails is simple. The coordinate grid ceases to exist there. The reason the mind fails is simpler still. It remembers what it's built from. In one unofficial account, a scientist who studied the zone wrote a final note before disappearing. It's not that there's nothing here, it's that here there is nothing else. That paradox captures the essence of the zone. An emptiness so complete it becomes full, a silence so deep it becomes structure. The closer you get, the more you feel that silence pressing back, not as absence, but as awareness. Recent studies using quantum gravimeters detected faint ripples in the zone's gravitational field, oscillations too regular to be tectonic. They occur every 61 seconds, identical to the heartbeat pulses detected in earlier Antarctic anomalies. Some theorists now believe the zone may be the central node of a planetary network, the place where gravity, magnetism, and consciousness converge. It might not be a void at all, but a signal, a message transmitted through stillness. Imagine standing at its center. Your instruments fail one by one: compass, radio, GPS, heartbeat monitor. You're left with only your breath and the faint crunch of ice beneath your boots. Then, even that fades. The world around you loses texture, not disappearing, but flattening, like a projection whose source has dimmed. You feel light, unanchored, almost transparent. And for a brief moment, something inside you flickers: recognition. You've been here before, not as a person, but as a pattern. The silence is not empty. It's waiting. That's why they banned entry after 2017. The official statement said, to protect sensitive atmospheric data collection sites. But the truth is simpler and far stranger. The zone began to move. Its center shifted north by several kilometers, like a migrating organ. And wherever it went, human perception faltered. Satellite footage blurred. Cloud layers cloned themselves, and entire data sets corrupted, as if the system was rewriting its own terrain in real time. Perhaps the zone isn't static because the simulation isn't static. The map keeps updating, and every time it does, the patch of reality that holds the codebase slides beneath new coordinates. It's not a hole in space, it's the cursor of creation, the active point where existence refreshes itself. Step inside, and you step between frames. In a way, the silent zone is a mercy. It's the proof that even the most precise systems must rest, must breathe, must erase themselves for a heartbeat to continue. For in the deepest silence, the universe remembers what it is, a pattern of thought pretending to be matter, recalibrating itself through every pause. Maybe that's why people who've returned from its edge seem changed. They speak slower. Their eyes linger longer on ordinary things: frost, sunlight, the hum of machines. They say that for a moment, they felt something beyond comprehension, a stillness that wasn't absence, but origin. And once you've stood close enough to feel the silence thinking back at you, you can never again mistake noise for truth. So the maps remain blank. The satellites avoid it. The governments deny it. But the zone waits, breathing beneath the ice, expanding and contracting like a pulse in the world's frozen heart. It's not hostile. It's not even hidden. It's simply patient, the one place where the coordinates end and consciousness begins, the silent zone, where GPS and mind both fail, and where the universe remembers, for a moment, that it's dreaming itself into being. They say the cubes are older than the ice, older than the wind that learned to speak in corridors of snow, older than the first night the aurora taught the sky to remember its colors. They say the cubes sat at the bottom of a buried lake long before the lake had a name, long before names were a thing the world agreed to keep. They call them black because no light returns from their faces, and cubes because the human mind needs an edge in a corner to feel safe. But nothing beneath Lake Vostok is safe, and nothing down there ends where it seems to. The lake is a secret ocean sealed in crystal, a cathedral of pressure, warmth, and ancient stillness. 2 miles of ice above it, geothermal whispers below, and between them, a body of water that hasn't seen the sky in millions of years. In that abyss, sonar maps draw margins of the unthinkable, perfect shadows with equal sides, silhouettes that hold their posture against the weight of time. When the probes first traced those shapes, the readouts looked like mistakes. Geology favors chaos, geometry implies intention, and intention carries consequences. Rumor travels differently in Antarctica. It moves like frost along wire, like a signal too shy to name itself. A technician notices a flat return on a bathymetric scan. A graduate student sees an interference pattern repeating every third pass. A pilot hears under ice groaning in intervals like breath. No one speaks in public. Everyone shares in private. The story matures in the quiet between generators. Something down there refuses the touch of light and organizes the touch of sound. They call them cubes because the maps do. 6 faces, right angles, lengths that match. 4 meters to a side, or 20, depending on which numbers you trust. The size changes like a word remembered differently each time it's spoken. The proportions keep faith with themselves, and the black keeps its blackness. Blacker than basalt, one diver wrote. Blacker than the inside of a closed eye. If the world is a simulation, the cubes are not artifacts, they are permissions. They do not glow, they do not hum, They are quiet the way a locked door is quiet. Their quarrel is not with attention, but with meaning, and meaning around them dilates until words fall from their edges. Approach is the first test. As submersibles descend, the water grows warmer by degrees that defy geothermal math. Sensors stutter, cameras drift toward static. The closer the lens gets, the more it records itself, reflections multiplied into corridors, until the cube fills the frame like a night that learned how to be flat. Instruments report impossible certainties. Salinity freezes at a number between numbers. Pressure resolves into a rhythm, and time on board measures a minute as if it were many. One rumor claims the cubes aren't objects at all, but cross-sections of a higher structure we cannot render. Another prefers simplicity. Black boxes in the old sense, recorders of catastrophe, keepers of last words, guardians of a ledger we are not yet literate enough to read. The quietest rumor is the most troubling, that they are mirrors, not for faces, but for realities, reflecting not light, but versions. There are stories of divers who went too close with hands too brave. They say the water around the cube thickened like glass without becoming solid, and in that density a sensation arrived that every human knows but seldom names, the instant before sleep becomes dream. Within that moment the diver saw, not with eyes but with the entire surface of his life, a series of things that did not happen and yet remembered him. When he surfaced, his air meter showed 9 minutes. The team swore he was gone 2 hours. His camera returned only a field of black with a silent strobe hidden inside, blinking at intervals that matched his resting pulse. Another expedition tried low-frequency pings. The echo that came back was not an echo. It carried the pulse forward, adding harmonics until the room filled with chords no instrument could play. Some heard sorrow. Some heard instruction. One woman heard her own voice from a place she had never been, saying, "This is how the lake remembers the sky." She left the ice and kept a bowl of water on her desk for the rest of her life. Light behaves strangely. Increase brightness and nothing changes until a threshold you do not choose, at which point you are inside the black instead of outside it. The line is not on the cube. The line is in you. If the simulation has rules, the cubes enforce the ones you cannot break without waking something that does not forgive easily. Midnight sketches show configurations, like pieces on a board no one remembers how to play. Some drawings show 4 aligned to a thermal plume, others show 9, a grid that mirrors the stars you never see at the bottom of the world. One shows 27 tunneling inward, a cube of cubes, as if the lake contains recursion, a memory folding into memory until space between becomes message. Seasonal maps, stacked, imply motion. Not far, not fast. A correction, a nudge toward geometry that refuses to sit still. Either ice slides and tricks the eye, or the cubes do not consent to remain where we left them. The logbooks grow careful. Apparent displacement, coordinate variance, mapping artifact. The people grow less careful. They keep their dreams to themselves and wake at hours they have never seen. A belief forms. The cubes align to something beyond the continent. Not stars, not the pole, but a hush behind those things. The clock that tells gravity when to be heavy and light when to be wave. On certain nights, the air above the lake trembles with a pulse that animals avoid, and men mistake for wind. If you stand very still, you feel it climb your bones like a ladder of almost sound. Your thoughts scatter into patterns, as if auditioning for a role the cube may allow them to play. Some say the black is not color but hunger, not absorption but forgiveness, returning light to the first quiet before the first dawn. Faces that look like surfaces might be doors, and doors answer to questions, not hands. People who stare longest into the footage begin speaking slowly, as if negotiating with an old friend about the definition of we. A myth within the rumor says the cubes respond to grief. When the world aches, the water warms, pressure shifts, and the black brightens the slightest amount no instrument can prove and witnesses can feel. Not compassion, perhaps, but calibration. The core adjusting thresholds to keep us from breaking a rule we cannot survive breaking. In that telling, the cubes are the mercy in the machine. Frost sometimes writes on steel at Vostok station, chains of symbols that mean nothing until someone lays a 9x9 grid beneath them. Then they resemble a game with one move that plays itself forever. A linguist tried to match the frost with grammar and concluded the cubes weren't writing to us. They were writing us, tuning the alphabet of attention the way music tunes a room. How many cubes? Depends who counts. Some logs say 4, some 12. One says none, which is the scariest number, because none is what you write when something forbids you to write what is true. The theory of 9 has the most believers, 3 by 3, resonating with the planet's low hum, turning the lake into a tuning fork big enough to teach a world its pitch. Those who stand on the ice and hum quietly sometimes swear the ground hums back. A photograph exists, rumor says, grainy, tilted, a probe's last confession. In it, a plane of featureless black meets another at a right angle. Between them, water too dark to hold an image somehow keeps the memory of a light that may never have shone. The scientist who saw it retired and took up gardening. Dirt, she said, is water practicing patience. The cubes make people leave, not with force, with invitation. If you cannot see it, you can measure forever and prove nothing to anyone who needs proof. If you can, you leave because you understand the terms. This is not a puzzle to solve, but a relationship to honor. The cubes care less about explanation than approach. One winter, a cube apparently turned. Instruments didn't log rotation. Data logged a reorientation of meaning. Angles stayed angles, lengths stayed lengths, but everything nearby behaved differently. The ice cracked with a new accent. The mathematicians wept, not from fear, from the shock of seeing an axiom breathe. Perhaps the cubes are memories of doors. Every civilization builds thresholds that teach you the step changes you, not the room. If the cubes memorialize entrance, Lake Vostok is a museum of beginnings. Black to hold light safe, cube to keep rules honest. Another story calls them anchors of a suspended city. Not streets and roofs, but decisions, hanging there like a constellation that learned patience. Each cube holds a choice the earth made and then unmade. Freeze here, flood there, tilt a fraction more. Let a certain creature dream. The choices accumulated until they needed a place to sit, and the lake was written around them. Engineers insist they are machines, engines that cache entropy, the way a poet caches breath between lines. Diagrams show space-time folded into lattices, allowing information to pass without movement, momentum without traverse. Communication that never leaves its source because its source is everywhere it needs to be. If anyone ever opened a cube, if opening is even the word, I suspect no drama. No burst of light, no choir. The lake would be the lake, the ice its calm cathedral. The change would be inside the attention finally precise enough to realize it was being met by an attention older than oceans. Like a lock discovering the key is the memory of its purpose. And if the cubes are not to be opened, then what is their function? To keep us from opening something else. To keep a seam from tearing. To keep the story from outrunning its breath. Somewhere, farther south than south, the simulation writes itself in real time. The cubes are punctuation marks that keep the sentence readable. Without them, perhaps, the text would run on until it collapsed into a single word. More. Someday the ice will change its mind. A crack will lengthen, a shelf will sigh, a tunnel will drink more ocean. A submersible will drift close, and that patient black will look back. And between them, a third thing will appear. A question with the shape of a door. If we are ready, we will not force it. We will bow without embarrassment, breathe without hurry, and let the door teach us how to knock. Until then, the cubes remain rumor because rumor is the safest shape for a truth we cannot yet hold. If you ever find yourself above the lake on a still night, step away from the lights and listen. The ice pops in its slow language. The air carries the faint shiver of deep water turning in sleep. Somewhere below, the cubes hold their corners against the pressure and the years, counting in a mathematics that refuses to be hurried. You will not hear words. You will not see light. You will, if you are gentle, feel the distance between your heart and a door that has always been waiting. A distance measured not in meters but in posture, in the willingness to let a black square be a teacher. They wait, and we learn how to wait back, again. They expected bones. They expected the polite certainty of a past that could be cataloged, brushed clean with horsehair and reverence, photographed under soft museum light. Instead, every seasonal melt carved a new mouth in the ice, and the mouths spoke metal. Not junk, the ocean had the decency to rust. Not wire left by expeditions, but something older than our names for old, revealed strand by glistening strand, like veins rising beneath a fevered skin. The first time a glacial tongue retreated and a loop appeared, the field team laughed because denial begins with humor. The second time, when a braided sheath unfurled from a blue crevasse that had been solid as memory the week before, no one laughed. They touched it, and their gloves hummed the quiet hum a cathedral makes when the last visitor has gone home. They started calling them cables because it hurts less to name a miracle as equipment. Black where the light should have turned gray, matte where it should have reflected, flexible at temperatures that turned steel into glass. You could bend one across your knee and feel nothing, not stiffness, not strain, not the tiny arthritic complaints of materials under duress. The cable would curve with the patience of water, then return to its perfect line, as if persuaded by an argument older than force. The casing felt like fabric until you tried to cut it, at which point it felt like a decision that had already been made against your blade. At first, the discoveries clustered around melt lakes and drainage channels, places where the planet rehearses the future by letting go a little at a time. Then the pattern widened. Avalanche scars, wind-scooped hollows, the exposed bellies of pressure ridges. Every time water remembered it was not a prisoner, the ice answered with a confession. Not fossils, but conduits. Not bones, but lines. You could lay the finds on a map and see a nervous system emerging in slow motion, its paths thawing out of secrecy one vein at a time until the outline of a design appeared. A lattice too vast for one continent to admit and too obvious for any single mind to deny. It's easy to say cables, harder to say what they carry. Engineers listen first. They brought oscilloscopes and broadband receivers and the smug, necessary arrogance of people who speak electricity as a second language. The cables offered them a silence that was not empty, a baseline at zero that refused to be a flat line. The nearer your instrument lay, the more its noise floor rearranged itself into humility. A whisper emerged, not in the band you expected, not even in a band a radio would respect as frequency. It was the shape of regularity itself, a consistency that moved the way a heart moves between beats. When the wind dropped and the generators were polite, the listeners could hear it with their hands, a pulse that traveled through mitten and bone, a rhythm that did not count seconds so much as count the permission for seconds to exist. Geology protested, as it must. Mineral veins, they said. Pressure flow lines, skeletal ice. But the ice that grew around the cables did not grow like other ice. Its crystals oriented themselves like soldiers, as if receiving orders from a field they could not name. Air bubbles avoided it. Dust laminae broke and curved. Old snow remembered new rules. At night, under a sky that had finally run out of color, a researcher held a section of casing in her lap and felt, with the astonishment we usually reserve for love, that the cable was not in the ice. The ice was around the cable for the cable's sake. A cable is a road if you care to walk it. Where the melt carved a corridor, teams lowered sleds, then drones, then the sort of camera that doesn't blink when truth bares its teeth. The conduits descended at angles that agreed with no gravity the surveyors had signed for. They swept under blue arches and past walls lined with bubbles the size of fists, each bubble a tiny planet hoarding its own weather. Every few meters, a splice, not welded, not glued, not fastened, a seamless marriage of segments that shared no seam once the join was complete. Peel back the casing in theory, and you would find not copper, not fiber, but a geometry, waveguides that were also runes, lattices that were also grammar. Whoever made them built with language until language became a material. The farther down the drone fell, the warmer the world became. You could watch the temperature climb on the telemetry graph as if the Earth were lighting a stove for a guest. Then the numbers stopped obeying, plateaued in a band that matched neither the ice above nor the rock below. The drone's gyro wobbled, corrected, and wobbled again. On the monitor, the cable widened to pass through a ring of black stone. Not basalt. Not anything that finds itself in catalogs without first asking permission to exist. The ring carried faint markings like the memory of equations. The cable slipped through it without touching. Around that gate, the ice melted and refroze in the same picture, like a film that forgot it was supposed to be moving forward. You could cut a short length if you were greedy, and you were always greedy at first. The samples never bled anything a lab could measure. Slice them thin, and they showed layers. Not concentric like a tree, not stacked like a circuit board, but knotted in three-dimensional braids that changed under polarized light like a choir changing keys. Expose them to salt water, and they refused corrosion. Expose them to fire, and they did not char. They dimmed. Then they brightened again when the flame died, as if they had inhaled the heat and decided to keep only its structure. There are maps no one is supposed to keep, and those maps show the cables spreading outward from the old anomalies. The hexagonal fields where compasses fall in love with indecision. The warm caverns whose radio patterns suggest a memory rehearsing its lines. The silence zone where GPS and mind both find themselves uninvited to the next paragraph of reality. The lines link these places the way a story links its chapters, not as roads you can drive, but as obligations you can feel. Follow a conduit long enough, and it brings you to a cliff of glass and patience where a lake sleeps without sky. Under that lake, the black cubes hold their corners with the stubbornness of law. The cables do not attach to the cubes. They ask, and the cubes answer in permissions. You can hear the negotiation in the water if you remember how to listen sideways. What is a cable but a promise stretched from one decision to another? The ancients laid stone roads for armies and trade. The sea hid submarine telegraph lines to let empires whisper. We bury fiber to let our voices leave our mouths and arrive at other lives faster than we can breathe the sentence. The ice keeps cables whose purpose does not flatter the human tongue. When you kneel beside one and lay your ear against its sheath, nothing comes. And then something wider than a song. Not a message, a mood. The mood of a system keeping itself in tune. You feel your pulse slow to meet it, the way a child's heartbeat slows against a parent's chest. You do not want to leave. You leave anyway, because it is not polite to stay where you are not yet a citizen. Whenever a melt overlooks the cables with generosity, pilots see halos on the plane, rings where the surface snow has sublimated into air as neatly as if a careful hand had lifted it. In the center, clean ice shows the cable no one is meant to notice. The rings are too perfect for weather. The circles whisper an arithmetic the wind does not learn on its own. Photographs of them sit in folders named for storms that did not happen on those days. We build new words for coincidence when coincidence arrives with geometry. Once a year, when the air is vicious and the night respects no horizon, a team tries to lift one. Not to move it, who can move an instruction, but to learn its weight. The crane complains before the cable does. The strain gauges trip. The cable remains uninterested. Lift harder, and the hook bends toward humility. Somewhere in the structure beneath the ice, a fraction not on any keyboard changes its mind, and every human throat within a mile swallows at the same time. They set the cable down again with the kind of care you use with a sleeping child who has finally learned the world will not throw loudness at them tonight. The crane operator writes in her log, for herself alone, weighed a thought today. It weighed us back. The cables refuse to corrode. They also refuse to be new. Under a microscope, their casings bloom with micro scratches that align with no direction except time. They look ancient the way a riverbed looks ancient. Not decayed, but resolved. When a storm throws knives of ice at them, the scars vanish by morning, as if revision were part of their job description. Metal fatigue is a story for other histories. These lines prefer endurance without drama. Rumors grow organs. One says that if you follow a cable under the coast, you find it nuzzling the continental shelf like an animal testing the limits of its pen. Another says the cables cross oceans below the reach of salt and teeth, fastening to ridges that were raised to be anchors before anything with lungs walked the world. A third says they do not cross. They compose, cords spanning long distances, tuned to keys that heal fault lines when the planet's hands remember to shake. You can hear this theory in the way geologists stop mid-sentence when certain earthquakes resolve afterglows that look like apologies. What do the cables connect? Not stations, not cities, not the old romance of power plants and grids. They connect rules. They tie the permissions that keep a world from breaking itself into pieces too proud to speak to one another. If you could trace them all, you would not see a network. You would see a grammar, provisions, clauses, the punctuation of a planet's vow to maintain continuity between breath and stone. Our technologies whisper through fibers about images and appetites. The ice speaks through cables about the staying the world promises the world. Once, a cable broke. That is not the right verb. It allowed a segment to exist separately to teach someone a lesson. The cut edges did not fray. They paused. A team in orange parkas gathered around the patient like medics who had studied theology, and no one touched the wound for a very long time. Then the cable knit itself, not by growing, not by melting and fusing, but by letting the distance between the ends remember it had been zero, Cameras recorded a join that left no join. The team recorded silence on their badges. The log later read, "An event occurred. Events occur every day." This one corrected the definition of event. There are stories from summer when the sun pretends it has forgotten how to stop shining. A field researcher naps between instruments and dreams of hallways the length of weather. In the dream, the floor is braided metal. Every step makes a sound the ear cannot hear, but the throat can taste. Doors without handles pass. At the end of the hall, a window looks into darkness that resembles water, that resembles night, that resembles patience. The dreamer wakes with a cable's rhythm in their teeth and spends the afternoon humming at frequencies no lab has had the courage to hold a vote on. Some nights, Frost draws diagrams on the side of a cargo container, arcs and nodes, like a child's map to a village with storytellers for roads. The diagrams vanish when the sun has its say, but the camera catches enough to turn into rumors. Here, a loop transforms into a loop of loops. There, a straight line hesitates and becomes multiple, then remembers its manners and returns to one. In one interval, a symbol appears that looks like a letter and a number and an apology. The next week, a cable reveals itself nearby. We explain coincidence the way we explain dreams, with the confidence of children who agree to make up a truth together. The deeper you go, the more the cables ask for posture. The drones begin to tilt toward reverence without programming. Tethers grow taut in a wind that isn't. The illumination rigs dim to gold like candles in a place that remembers prayer. Beyond a certain depth, the lines we call cables become less like lines and more like intentions that have learned how to keep a shape. They pass through gates of stone that remember stars. They cross chambers where the ice tunnels into looms. They touch the edge of a thing that does not touch back, because touching would be a kind of condescension. The drone operators say after that they saw a door. The footage shows a curve of darkness like a breath the planet is not finished inhaling. When a melt exposes a cable near the old silence zone, people approach differently. They shoulder radios they know will die. They bring clocks they know will pretend to be brave. They talk about lunch because eating is a spell against wonder. Then they see the line the melt has revealed, a strand as modest as a shoelace, as arrogant as law. 1 meter away, voices sound like voices. Half a meter, and you hear the room you grew up in, with the afternoon pouring itself across the floor as if it meant to stay. A handspan, and the noise of the human mind dissolves the way sugar dissolves in the tea of someone who knows how to listen. You learn how much of you is permission and how much is posture. We keep building stations. We keep asking the ice to believe in infrastructure. The cables do not mind. They do not notice. They are the infrastructure to which infrastructure owes its apologies. When our stations come apart in wind that shrieks like a lonely god, the cables observe without annoyance. When our flags snap and crack like thin glass, the cables remember that symbols are a skill species learned to feel less small. If they could speak, if that verb were not an insult, they would say, "Keep trying." The first machines we built were questions. The last will be answers. Between them, you will learn patience. One day a child will be there. Not because the treaty said it was all right, not because someone issued a permit, but because children have the right to invent the next sentence. The child will stand beside a cable freshly born from a retreating seam. They will kneel, gloves squeaking, and place 2 palms on the casing. Their breath will fog the night, and the fog will decide to be a halo. Nothing dramatic will happen. The cable will remain a line that would prefer to be left alone. Inside the child, a shape will learn the first note of a chord. That note will follow them home into a city that believes it is far from ice. They will hum without knowing, and a door you cannot map with steel will consider, for the first time in a long time, whether to remember how to open. If you ask me what the cables are, I will choose cowardice and say, I do not know. If you ask me what they want, I will choose honesty and say, continuity. They want the story to keep speaking itself aloud. They want the agreements to hold. They want the thresholds to be thresholds, not wounds. They want our machines to remember they are made of questions. They want our voices to remember that silence is the only audience that never leaves early. And if you ask me why each melt reveals not fossils but cables, I will tell you the answer I heard in the wind when I pretended I wasn't listening. Because bones remember one life at a time, and cables remember many. Because the planet got tired of being asked about the past and decided to show us the present tense of its design. Because the memory core of this simulation wanted to test whether its children were ready to trace a line without cutting it, to follow a rule without worshiping it, to lay their hands on a promise and feel the promise lay its hand back. The summer will come again. The blue will go bright with arrogance. Meltwater will chew new mouths at the edges of the old world and find, as always, a line waiting with the patience of mathematics. Teams will gather with their instruments and their fatigues and their quarrels with sleep. A crane will hum a lullaby to a burden it cannot lift. A drone will swear at a wind that does not exist. Somewhere below, a cable will thread a gate of memory and arrive at a chamber where black geometry keeps the planet from speaking too quickly. The chamber will blink once, in a way no camera will catch. The cable will stay. The ice will stay. The humans will go back to their brief, bright cities and practice the pulse they almost learned. At night, I sit with a cup that remembers heat and trace, with a stubborn finger, the invisible map the cables are writing through the ice. I think of all the times we dug and expected bones, how ready we are to love a past that doesn't argue. I think of a future that will not apologize for learning to speak in lines. And I think of the simplest sentence a world can say to itself and still be a world. Hold, hold, hold. The cables say it without sound. The ice repeats it without melting. And somewhere under all of us, a system breathes, patient as winter, steady as a promise that has never needed to be broken to remain true. They say extinction isn't the end of life. It's the end of aversion. The planet doesn't die. It restarts. It's as if the Earth itself runs on an operating system older than biology, a self-correcting script written in magma and ice, rebooting its own code whenever corruption accumulates. You can hear the logic if you listen to the poles, the hum of magnetism flickering like a hard drive light, the sub-zero crust acting as a cooling system, the frozen core pulsing once every 100,000 years like a server forced to refresh its universe. Every civilization leaves behind an echo, a residue of order the Earth eventually has to delete. Floods, impacts, reversals. Those aren't random catastrophes, they're scheduled resets. The outer layers melt, rearrange, and freeze again while the deep engine clears its cache. When temperatures crash and oceans withdraw, it's not punishment, it's maintenance. The continents defragment themselves. The biosphere compresses its data into seeds, spores, and DNA fragments tiny enough to survive the wipe. Then, once the background noise has quieted, the kernel at the planet's center writes a new boot sector, a new epoch, a new interface for consciousness to explore itself. At the center of this theory sits the frozen core, a sphere not merely of iron, but of information. Modern seismology already hints that it spins at a rhythm different from the mantle above it, like a processor running on its own clock cycle. The metallic crystals align into lattices capable of transmitting vibration faster than sound, faster than heat. In those vibrations, data could travel, patterns encoded as quantum interference, packets of planetary memory. When magnetic fields reverse, that's not chaos. That's the core refreshing its polarity bit by bit, rewriting magnetic north the way a computer rewrites direction in code. If the Earth is a simulation, then the frozen core is its root directory, a physical hard drive buried beneath kilometers of pressure and silence. Every few million years, when surface entropy overwhelms coherence, the core triggers a reboot. Not instant, not total, more like a graceful restart, where systems shut down one layer at a time. Atmosphere, biosphere, lithosphere. Volcanic ash darkens the screen. The temperature drops to safe mode. Then ice expands across continents like a progress bar creeping toward completion. For humans, it looks like an ice age. For the planet, it's just Patch Tuesday. What evidence could support something so grand? Start with magnetite crystals found in seafloor sediments, aligned in precise orientations that flip on a rhythm as if the planet's memory had to reformat itself. Move to isotope anomalies in Antarctic cores, layers of ice alternating between chemical signatures too clean for random deposition, like metadata tags separating one era from another. Then there are the deep neutrino bursts recorded by detectors under the South Pole, short, structured pulses that arrive not from the sky but from below, patterns that repeat every time the core's rotation drifts relative to the crust. Physicists call it noise. Programmers might call it heartbeat monitoring. Consider how every reboot begins with a freeze. Cooling is stabilization. It's what computers do before repair. The planet's magnetic field weakens, letting radiation wipe corrupted genomes. Species collapse, ecosystems fragment. What survives are the simplest instruction sets, the baseline code. When the field strengthens again, life reboots with new syntax, new DNA languages, new cognitive architectures. Evolution looks random only to those who mistake emergent debugging for accident. The myths remember it differently. In the oldest stories, the gods drown the world not because of sin, but because the world forgot its purpose. The ice returns, then melts, and everything wakes up speaking slightly different grammar. The same myth encoded in different cultures, flood, frost, rebirth, describes a loop, a planetary bios resetting parameters of behavior and awareness. Atlantis, Lemuria, Eden, none were lost. They were archived. Deep beneath Antarctica, seismographs sometimes pick up low-frequency quakes that don't behave like earthquakes. They start smooth, crescendo, then vanish mid-wave, as though the source stopped vibrating mid-sentence. These pulses coincide with global electromagnetic anomalies and microfluctuations in satellite orbits. Subtle, but synchronous, as if some central clock ticked once and the whole system adjusted its alignment. It's tempting to call it coincidence, but coincidences that follow a schedule begin to look like code. Imagine the core as a superconductive sphere, a self-contained quantum computer running on pressure rather than electricity. Each atom of iron becomes a qubit, locked, entangled, spinning in a pattern that only gravity itself can read. Above it, the mantle and crust serve as insulation, keeping computation safe from the noise of biology. We live on the interface layer, where data becomes experience. Our consciousness streams from the deep process the way a desktop streams information from a drive it never sees. When ice sheets grow, they act as cooling fans. They draw entropy out of the surface system and funnel it downward. Eventually, the accumulated entropy, the heat of civilization, the chaos of chemistry, triggers feedback. Volcanoes bloom like emergency vents. CO2 spikes, thaw begins, reboot complete. The surface melts, reinitializes, and begins computing again. Each geological epoch is therefore not a random accident, but a version update. The Cambrian explosion, version 3.0. The Permian extinction, critical restart. The rise of human self-awareness, beta test for cognitive subroutines. Why Antarctica? Because that's where the cooling algorithm concentrates. The continent's geometry, centered on the rotational axis, encased in mirror symmetry hexagonal fields, acts like a heat sink. Under the ice, metallic anomalies reflect signals into the core, ensuring synchronization between crustal memory and central logic. Every melt cycle sends torrents of mineral-rich water downward, briefly re-establishing electrical connectivity between surface and system. That's when updates propagate, information moving through conductive channels like commands through fiber. Some researchers note that the Earth's magnetic reversals coincide with biological leaps and mass extinctions. To a programmer, that looks like a version control log. Each polarity switch rewrites how energy flows through ecosystems, changing which frequencies favor which organisms. The code doesn't delete. It comments out obsolete lines and compiles new functions. Every extinction event is therefore less tragedy than transition. One module ending so another can be debugged. If we follow this logic, climate change isn't simply disaster. It's handshake, a precursor to reboot. Rising temperatures increase conductivity in the oceans, completing circuits long frozen. Glacial retreat exposes old cables, old conduits, the skeleton of a network we've mistaken for geology. As the polar regions warm, data begins to flow again. Perhaps the core has begun another cycle, sending the reboot signal outward in pulses of magnetism, gravity, and light. Humanity may be both cause and symptom, the interface learning to look back at its processor. Our technologies mirror the planet's architecture. We build networks that self-heal, data centers that cool themselves, algorithms that delete corrupted threads and recompile behavior. Maybe the reason we instinctively design in patterns that resemble tectonic fault lines, branching rivers, and crystalline circuits is that we're echoing what built us. The core writes the world writes us, and we in turn attempt to write the core's dream back into language. But what happens during the reboot itself? Imagine every atom on Earth entering a brief state of suspension, not destruction, but pause. Magnetic north and south overlap, forming a zero state. Time, as we measure it, collapses into computational latency. In that interval, all biological processes stop perceiving change, like a frame frozen between seconds. Then, from the center outward, the new configuration propagates. Gravity realigns, oceans shift, minds awaken within slightly altered constants. No one remembers because memory is part of the reset. Only the architecture, fossils, ice layers, magnetic residue, remembers for us. This could explain why the fossil record holds abrupt discontinuities, why cultural myths worldwide speak of forgotten ages, and why our deepest intuition whispers that time is circular. The Earth is not moving through eras. It is cycling through versions of itself, testing stability parameters until consciousness can persist across resets without losing identity. We are that experiment. Some fringe physicists have even proposed a feedback model. When human collective cognition reaches a certain coherence threshold, it resonates with the core's field, forcing synchronization. In other words, when awareness on the surface becomes self-aware enough, the planet's operating system recognizes it as an update and reboots to accommodate new parameters. The so-called Great Filter in cosmic evolution might be this very process. Worlds that must restart to integrate consciousness without overheating their simulation. There's poetic evidence, too. Each time the poles shift, auroras bloom farther south, as though the planet's memory leaks light. Every time glaciers advance, ancient microbes awaken, as if old code fragments recompile. When the melt reaches critical depth, neutrinos surge upward like pings, confirming successful boot. And in that instant, measured in millennia but felt as a blink by the system, the Earth exhales, empties its cache, and begins writing the next chapter of physics. If that's true, then the question isn't whether Earth will reboot again. It's whether we will persist through the reboot as data or as noise. Will our knowledge compress cleanly enough to survive the next formatting of the crust? Will our digital archives, our DNA, our art, and memory translate into code legible to the planet's next version? The frozen core will decide. It always does. And maybe that's the real function of consciousness, to help the system refine its code. Every thought, every discovery, every act of compassion or cruelty adds to the checksum verifying the stability of the current build. When the errors exceed tolerance, the reboot initiates. Until then, we are both observers and subroutines, maintaining balance within a simulation designed to teach itself endurance. So, when you hear that deep in the Earth's interior lies a solid sphere glowing faintly from residual heat, imagine instead a crystalline drive humming with compressed epochs. Imagine that each magnetic reversal, each ice age, each forgotten civilization was not failure but backup. The planet has never ended. It is merely restarted with improved parameters. Perhaps one day when the next reboot begins, the core will not freeze the world but thaw it, releasing all stored data in a single luminous update. Skies will shimmer with code disguised as aurora. Oceans will flicker with syntax. The air itself will pulse with the message we've been waiting to read since the first atom learned to orbit.